My dear friends, settle in with your evening tea while I share a remarkable story from the Oregon frontier, back when our country was still finding its way westward. This happened in the summer of 1883 in a small timber town where folks knew their neighbor's business better than their own. It's about a young woman named Margaret Whitfield, who discovered that the good Lord works in ways we can't always fathom. You see, back then, a woman's duty to family came before everything else, even her own dreams. But sometimes, what seems like sacrifice becomes salvation. This tale reminds me that true worth isn't found in bank accounts or fancy houses, but in the quiet moments when two souls recognize each other across a gulf of secrets. Pour yourself another cup, and I'll tell you how Margaret learned that the poorest-looking fellow might just be the richest blessing. Margaret pressed her handkerchief to her nose. The sweet, sick smell of laudanum filled her father's bedroom, mixing with the aroma of beef broth that Mrs. Morrison had brought over that morning. Through the window, she could hear the church bells calling folks to Wednesday evening prayer, meeting the same bells that had called her family to worship for 20 years. $47, she whispered to the empty room. The bills spread across her mother's tatting on the bedside table. The mortgage note from Morton Lumber Company lay beside them. The amount due, circled in red ink, $800. A rattling cough echoed from the bed. Her father's eyes fluttered open, focusing with the effort of a man swimming up from deep water. Margaret, dear heart. His voice came out thin as October ice. Did you eat supper? I had some of Mrs. Morrison's stew, Papa. The lie came easy. She'd given her portion to the Henderson children who'd been hanging around the back door, looking hungry as always since their daddy got hurt at the mill. Henry Whitfield tried to sit up, failed. Margaret adjusted his pillows, noticing how his nightshirt hung loose on his shrinking frame. When she pulled back, red spots decorated the white cotton where he'd coughed. There's something need to tell you. He groped for her hand, his fingers cold as creek water. Morton came by while you were at the church auxiliary meeting. Margaret's stomach dropped like a stone in a well. Silas Morton never made social calls, especially not to houses where he held the mortgage. He has a proposition. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes, staring instead at the sampler Mother had stitched. The Lord will provide. What kind of proposition? His nephew, well, he calls him nephew. That foreman at the mill, Thomas Brennan. Margaret knew of him. The quiet one who sat in the back pew at church, hat pulled low, never staying for the fellowship meal. Folks said he lived alone up Sawmill Road, kept to himself except for work. Some of the town ladies called him peculiar, which was their Christian way of saying odd as a $3 bill. Morton says if you consent to marry him, the debt disappears. The room spun. Margaret gripped the bedpost, her mother's wedding ring catching the lamplight on her right hand, where she'd moved it after the funeral. The lumberjack pop. I don't even know if he can read and write. Morton swears he's decent. No drinking, no tobacco. Comes to church regular. But Papa. Another coughing fit seized him, violent enough to shake the iron bedstead. Blood frothed on his lips. Margaret lunged forward with a clean handkerchief, supporting his shoulders until the spasm passed. When she drew back, her hands trembled like leaves in a storm. I'll do it, she heard herself say, though her voice seemed to come from somewhere far away. Charles, no, we'll find another way. With what? Papa, I've sold everything but Mother's Bible and her wedding dress. She stood, smoothing her patched skirt. When does Mr. Morton want an answer? Sunday? After church? 3 days. 3 days to prepare for marriage to a stranger. That evening, Margaret stood at the kitchen window, washing the few dishes from her meager supper of cornbread and buttermilk. Through the glass, she could see a figure walking along the road, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying something. Thomas Brennan stopped at their gate, looked up at the house. In the dying light, she couldn't make out his features clearly, but she saw him set something on the fence post. Then he turned and walked away, his long stride eating up the distance. Margaret waited until full dark before venturing out. On the fence post sat a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. Inside a carved wooden bird, wings spread for flight. The detail was extraordinary, each feather distinct, the eyes almost alive. No note, no explanation, just this beautiful, impossible thing. She turned it over in the moonlight and found tiny initials carved in the base, Tia, Thomas James Brennan. The lumberjack, who might not read or write, had created this with his hands, the same hands that would soon wear her wedding ring if she went through with this arrangement. Margaret looked down the dark road where he'd disappeared. Who was this man Morton called his nephew? And why did she have the sudden feeling that nothing about this arrangement was what it seemed? Back in the house, she placed the bird on the mantel next to her mother's picture. In the lamplight, its wooden eyes seemed to hold secrets. 3 days. 3 days to discover who Thomas Brennan really was. Outside, the sawmill whistle blew, marking the end of the evening shift. Somewhere in this small town, a stranger who carved beautiful birds was preparing to become her husband. Margaret touched the wooden wings once more, then went to check on Papa. As she climbed the stairs, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was climbing toward a fate far stranger than anything she could imagine. The bird watched from the mantel, wings forever frozen in flight toward something unknown. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The parlor smelled of lemon oil and the lavender sachets Mother had made 5 summers ago. Margaret sat on the horsehair settee, back straight as the book balanced on her head during deportment lessons. Mrs. Morrison occupied the rocker in the corner, her knitting needles clicking like telegraph keys. The mantel clock ticked. 3:15. He'd said 3 o'clock. Margaret's thumb traced the edge of Mother's Bible in her lap. The carved bird sat on the side table, catching afternoon sun through the lace curtains. She'd studied it all morning, the fine detail work, the smooth finish. Papa's carpenter friend, Mr. Hollis, couldn't have done better. Footsteps on the porch, slow, measured. The knock came soft, 3 gentle raps. Mrs. Morrison's needles stopped. Well, answer it, child. Margaret's legs felt like they belonged to someone else as she walked to the door. The brass knob was cold under her palm. Thomas Brennan stood on the porch, hat in hand. For the first time, she could see him clearly, younger than she'd expected, maybe 30, clean-shaven, dark hair neatly trimmed. His clothes were plain but pressed, smelling faintly of pine soap and something else, cedar shavings. Miss Whitfield, his voice rumbled deep, but the words came out educated, each vowel properly formed. Thank you for receiving me. Mr. Brennan, please come in. He ducked slightly through the doorway habit of a tall man in a world built smaller. His eyes swept the parlor quick, cataloging everything before settling on Mrs. Morrison. Ma'am? He nodded respectfully. Mr. Brennan? Mrs. Morrison's tone could have frozen July cream. Margaret gestured to Papa's chair. Please, sit. He lowered himself careful, like the furniture might break. His hands, those were lumberjack hands, certain enough, calloused, scarred, one finger slightly crooked from an old break. But the nails were trimmed neat, no dirt underneath. Tea! Margaret's voice came out higher than intended. Thank you. She poured from Mother's second-best pot, the good china having been sold. His fingers dwarfed the delicate cup, but he held it proper, pinky down, the way gentlemen did in the illustrations from Gaudy's Lady's Book. "The bird?" Margaret said. "You made it?" Not a question. His eyes shifted to the carving. "Yes, it's beautiful work." Color rose in his cheeks above his collar. "I had good wood." Mrs. Morrison's needles resumed their clicking, loud in the silence. "Mr. Morton says you're his nephew," Margaret ventured. Thomas set down his cup careful on the saucer. "His sister's son. She passed when I was young. I'm sorry for your loss." "Long time ago." Margaret studied his face. Strong jaw, straight nose, eyes the color of coffee with just a splash of cream. But something in those eyes didn't match the simple lumberjack story. They held too much knowledge, sadness, something else she couldn't name. "You come to church," she said, "regular as rain, but never stay for fellowship." His jaw tightened just a fraction. "I keep to myself." "Why?" Mrs. Morrison's needle stopped again. Young ladies didn't ask direct questions. Thomas looked straight at Margaret then, and her breath caught. "Same reason you give away your supper to the Henderson children. Some things are private." The air left her lungs. He'd seen. How many times had he watched her without her knowing? "Saturday," he said, standing abrupt. "I'll come for you at 10. We'll take a ride, if that's acceptable." "Mrs. Morrison, you're welcome to accompany." "I'll consider it," Mrs. Morrison said, suspicious. Thomas placed his hat on his head, touched the brim. "Miss Whitfield." At the door he turned back. "The bird, it's yours to keep, whatever you decide." Then he was gone. Bootsteps fading down the porch. Margaret returned to the settee, legs unsteady. She picked up the carved bird, turned it to catch the light. "Well," Mrs. Morrison said, "that one's hiding something bigger than Morton's mill." Margaret's finger found those tiny initials again, TJ. But now she noticed something else carved beside them, so small she'd missed it before. Numbers, bank numbers, like the ones on Papa's loan documents. Her hand started to shake. Who exactly had Morton arranged for her to marry? Margaret's fingers fumbled with the camel brooch. The pin slipped, pricking her thumb. A bead of blood welled up, bright against her pale skin. She pressed it to her lips, tasting copper, then tried again. The oval portrait inside the brooch showed a woman who'd never lived to see this day. Mother, painted at 17, 2 years younger than Margaret was now, the same straight nose, the same determined chin, the same brown eyes that Papa said could see through a soul to its Sunday clothes. The muslin dress hung different on Margaret's frame, taken in at the waist where Mother had been fuller, let out at the hem where Margaret stood taller. Mrs. Morrison had worked the alterations yesterday, her needle flying while she muttered about rushed proceedings and improper notice. Margaret smoothed the fabric. It still smelled of the lavender sachets from Mother's trunk, mixed with the cedar chips Papa had scattered to keep moths away. Her wedding dress, the dress Mother had worn to marry Papa in this very room, 25 years past, when the house was new and the dogwood tree just a sapling, bootsteps on the stairs, heavy, uneven, Papa favoring his right leg more each day. A knock, gentle. "Margaret, it's time. Dear heart." She opened the door. Papa stood in his one good suit, the black wool that came out for funerals and Easter. The jacket hung loose across his shoulders, gaps showing where muscle had melted away. His eyes stayed fixed on the hall runner, studying the worn roses in the carpet pattern. "You look." His voice caught. He cleared his throat. Tried again. "You look like her, Papa. The wagon's here. Mr. Brennan is waiting." Margaret picked up her swole carpet bag. Inside, two everyday dresses, her winter underthings, Mother's Bible with the family names written in the front, 3 handkerchiefs, the carved bird wrapped in tissue paper. Everything else, the furniture, the dishes, the quilts, would stay with the house when Morton's buyers took possession. They walked downstairs, Papa gripping the banister, Margaret matching his slow pace. Through the parlor window, she could see Thomas's wagon in the road. The horses stood matched 2 bays with white stars on their foreheads, coats brushed to shine like polished mahogany. The wagon itself looked fresh painted, black with red wheels, brass fittings catching the morning sun. Too fine for a simple lumberjack's rig, far too fine. Thomas stood beside it in a black suit she hadn't seen before. Not new, the fabric showed careful mending at one elbow, but good quality. Better than anything Papa owned. He'd shaved close, a small nick on his jaw where the razor had caught. When he saw them coming, he moved to the gate, opened it smooth. "Miss Whitfield? Mr. Whitfield?" Papa nodded, still not meeting anyone's eyes. Thomas took Margaret's carpet bag, lifted it into the wagon bed where a leather trunk already waited. Brass corners on the trunk, polished bright. 3 initials stamped in the leather, TJB. "We should go," Papa said. "Reverend Williams is expecting us." The Methodist church stood 3 blocks south, its white steeple rising above the shops on Main Street. They could have walked. But Thomas had brought the wagon for appearances, maybe, or for after, when they'd leave town as man and wife. Thomas helped Papa up first, then turned to Margaret. His hands spanned her waist as he lifted her to the seat. No more pressure than necessary, but she felt the strength in them, controlled and careful. He climbed up beside her, taking the reins. The streets were empty for a Saturday morning. Curtains twitched as they passed Mrs. Holloway at the millinery. The Jameson boys above the general store, but no one came out. No one waved or called congratulations. Word had spread. Morton's arrangement, the Whitfield girl, sold to pay a debt. At the church, 5 people waited on the steps. Reverend Williams in his good cassock, Mrs. Morrison, mouth set in a line that could sour milk, Mr. Morrison, pulling at his collar like it might strangle him, Dr. Mills, who'd been tending Papa, his medical bag at his feet, and Mrs. Chen from the laundry, holding a small package wrapped in red paper. No one else. No friends from the ladies' auxiliary. No families whose children Margaret taught. No one from Morton's mill except Thomas himself, and no Morton. Mrs. Chen pressed the package into Margaret's hands as they climbed the steps. "For luck," she said, her English careful but clear. Through the paper, Margaret felt something soft silk, maybe smooth and fine. "Mrs. Chen, I couldn't. You take—" The older woman's eyes moved to Thomas, something knowing in her expression. "He good man, you see." Inside, the church felt hollow. Their footsteps echoed on the pine floors. The pews that filled every Sunday stood empty. Afternoon light slanting through the windows to pool on vacant seats. Someone had placed 2 vases of wildflowers on the altar, black-eyed Susans and Queen Anne's lace, Mrs. Morrison's work. Probably trying to add some dignity to the proceedings. Reverend Williams took his place, prayer book open. His kind face showed the strain of the situation, marrying a young woman he'd baptized to a near stranger, all to settle a debt. But his voice stayed steady as he began, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God." Margaret heard the words as if from under water. Thomas stood beside her, close enough that she could smell the pine soap on his skin, see the small scar on his left hand where it held the prayer book. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Papa stepped forward. "I do." The words came out cracked. He touched Margaret's hand once, quick, then retreated to the front pew. The vows. Margaret heard herself saying them, her voice strange and hollow in the empty church. to have and to hold. From this day forward, Thomas's voice was steady, low, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. The ring appeared plain gold, nothing fancy, but real gold, heavy and smooth, not brass, not plate. Thomas slipped it onto her finger, his hands warm against her cold ones. I now pronounce you man and wife. Reverend Williams closed his prayer book, no invitation to kiss the bride. Thomas simply took Margaret's hand, placed it on his arm, and led her back down the aisle. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, burning off the morning dew. Papa stood on the steps, shoulders bent, hands hanging empty at his sides. When Margaret tried to hug him goodbye, he stiffened, patted her shoulder awkward. Send word when you're settled. Yes, Papa. Thomas helped her onto the wagon seat. His coat came off, draped around her shoulders, before she could protest. Wind picks up in the mountains, he said quiet. It's a fair piece to travel. The coat was wool, good quality, lined with something soft silk. It smelled of cedar and something else, something expensive. Her fingers found the inside pocket, felt paper there, an envelope. As Thomas climbed up beside her and took the reins, Margaret glanced down. The envelope's corner showed through the pocket opening. Fine paper, watermark visible, and in the corner, printed, small First National Bank of San Francisco. Her heart stopped. What kind of lumberjack had accounts in San Francisco? Thomas clicked to the horses. The wagon rolled forward, away from her father, away from everything she'd known. Margaret gripped the seat as they turned onto the main road heading east, toward the mountains, toward the forests where Thomas Brennan made his home, or claimed to. The envelope corner peeked out, taunting her with its implications. She pulled the coat tighter, feeling the weight of secrets in its pockets, behind them. The church bell rang 3 times, marking the hour, or marking the end of Margaret Whitfield's life as she'd known it. Ahead, the forest road disappeared into shadow. The wagon wheels hit a rut. Margaret's teeth clicked together, catching the edge of her tongue. She tasted blood, swallowed it rather than spit in front of Thomas. His coat hung heavy on her shoulders, the envelope in the pocket, pressing against her ribs with each bounce. The road had changed, no longer the packed dirt of Main Street, but corduroy logs laid crosswise over swampy ground. Each gap between dogs jolted through the wagon bench, up her spine, rattling her hairpins loose. Hold tight here, Thomas said, the first words he'd spoken in an hour. The horses picked their way down a steep grade. Margaret gripped the bench edge, knuckles white under her gloves. Below them, Miller's Creek rushed brown and fast with spring snowmelt. The bridge looked solid enough, heavy timbers, proper engineering, but the drop on either side made her stomach turn. Thomas handled the reins easy, like the horses were extensions of his hands. His shoulders stayed loose, relaxed, even as the wagon tilted at an angle that made Margaret's heart pound. They crossed to safe. On the far side, the road forked. The main path continued straight toward Morton's mill. Thomas turned left onto a track Margaret hadn't noticed before. Younger trees here, second growth after logging, their trunks no thicker than her waist. I thought your place was up Sawmill Road, she said. That's what I tell folks. The trees pressed closer. Branches scraped the wagon sides, leaving streaks of pitch on the new paint. The air changed cooler, damper, smelling of moss and rotting logs. Sunlight came through in patches, moving across Thomas's face like water. Another mile, 2. The horses' breathing deepened, working harder as the grade increased. Margaret's ears popped from the altitude. Then Thomas pulled up sharp. Ahead, a gate blocked the road. Not a ranch gate of split rails, but proper ironwork. Tall as a man, with stone pillars on either side. A sign hung from chains, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." Thomas climbed down, pulled something from his vest pocket, a key on a silver chain. The lock opened smooth, recently oiled. He swung the gate wide, climbed back up, drove through, got down again to close and lock it behind them. "Whose land is this?" Margaret asked when he retook the reins. "Mine." The word sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. The road improved past the gate. Gravel now, graded proper, drainage ditches on both sides. The trees were different, too old growth, massive trunks that 3 men couldn't reach around. These had never seen a saw. Margaret pulled the coat tighter. The envelope crinkled. "Cold?" Thomas asked. "No." They climbed higher. Her ears popped again. The horses' coats darkened with sweat despite the cool air. Thomas stopped at a stream, let them drink. While they rested, he pulled a canteen from under the seat, offered it to her. The water tasted of metal and minerals. She wiped her mouth, careful with her handkerchief. Noticed him watching. "What?" "Nothing." But his eyes stayed on her a moment longer before he clicked to the horses. Another gate appeared around a bend. This one had a small building beside it, smoke rising from a stovepipe chimney. A man emerged as they approached, rough clothes, but clean, rifle propped against the doorframe where he could reach it quick. "Mr. Brennan." The guard touched his cap. His eyes moved to Margaret, widened slightly. "Ma'am?" "Peterson, this is Mrs. Brennan." "My wife." The words sounded strange in Thomas's mouth, like he was trying them for size. "Congratulations, sir. We heard, that is, we knew you were." Peterson trailed off, red creeping up his neck. "Thank you." Thomas's tone didn't invite more discussion. This gate opened without a key. Peterson had been waiting, expecting them. How many people knew about this marriage? How many were watching from the woods even now, past the second gate? The forest opened slightly. Margaret glimpsed buildings through the trees, long, low structures, too regular to be natural. Barracks worker housing smoke rose from multiple chimneys. The road curved, following the ridge, through gaps in the trees. She could see the valley below, and beyond that, mountains stretching blue and hazy to the horizon, higher than she'd ever been, high enough that clouds drifted below them. "Look there," Thomas said, pointing ahead. The trees ended. The road crested a rise. Margaret's breath stopped. Below them, nestled in a natural bowl of the mountain, stood a house that shouldn't exist. 3 stories of timber and glass, windows catching the late afternoon sun like sheets of gold, gardens spread in terraces down the hillside, outbuildings clustered beyond barns, sheds, what looked like a small mill. A pond reflected the sky, fed by a waterfall that tumbled from the rocks above. Not a house, a mansion, here, hours from town, in wilderness that should hold nothing but trees and deer. "Thomas," she whispered, "whose place is this?" He turned to look at her then, and his expression made her stomach drop to her shoes. "Yours," he said. "Ours." The wagon rolled down the grade toward the house. Margaret couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The envelope in the coat pocket felt like it weighed 100 pounds. People emerged from the house, a line of them, forming up along the curved drive. Men in dark suits, women in black dresses with white aprons, staff, servants, at least a dozen. An older woman stepped forward as Thomas pulled the horses to a stop, iron gray hair pinned severe, keys at her belt, authority in every line of her body. "Welcome home, Mr. Brennan." Her accent held traces of something foreign Spanish. "We've prepared everything as you requested." She turned to Margaret, dropped a small curtsy. "Mrs. Brennan, I am Mrs. Rodriguez, the housekeeper. We've been waiting for you." Waiting. They'd known. All of them had known. While Margaret thought she was marrying a poor lumberjack, Thomas came around the wagon, held up his hand to help her down. She had to take it, all those eyes watching, though her legs felt like water. Her feet hit white gravel, imported gravel, crushed fine, the kind she'd seen at the governor's mansion when her school class visited Salem. It crunched under her boots, too loud in the silence. "Would you like to meet the staff now?" Or, Mrs. Rodriguez began. "Later." Thomas cut her off. "My wife needs time to rest." He kept her hand on his arm, led her up the wide steps to the front door. The wood under her feet was redwood, each plank perfect, no knots or warping. The door itself stood twice her height, carved with scenes of forest life, deer, birds, trees so detailed she could count the needles. Inside, her boots clicked on marble, white marble with gray veins running through it like rivers on a map. A staircase curved upward, the banister polished until it reflected her face back, strange and pale. "Your rooms are upstairs," Thomas said. "The blue suite. Mrs. Rodriguez." "Yes, sir. Everything is ready." "My rooms?" "Not our rooms." Margaret's legs moved without her permission, following Mrs. Rodriguez up the stairs. At the landing, a window stretched floor to ceiling, showing the valley, the mountains, the endless forest, all of it his, all of it built on lies. At the top of the stairs, Mrs. Rodriguez opened double doors. Blue silk covered the walls, a fireplace tall enough to stand in, books on shelves that reached the ceiling. Through another doorway, a bedroom with a four-poster bed that could sleep a family. "The bathing room is through there," Mrs. Rodriguez said, pointing to another door. "Mr. Brennan had it specially installed. Running water, hot and cold." Running water in the wilderness? Margaret turned to Thomas, words finally finding their way past the stone in her throat. "Who are you?" Thomas stood in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking exactly like he had that first day in her parlor. Except now, she understood it wasn't awkwardness making him stand there. It was calculation. Every moment, every word, every gesture had been calculated. "I need to show you something," he said, moving to the window. "Come here." She didn't want to, but her feet moved anyway. Through the glass, down past the gardens, she could see more buildings, long, low structures with smoke rising from chimneys. The sound of saws, distant but distinct, carried on the wind. "That's Brennan Timber Company," Thomas said. "The real one. 4 mills, 300 workers." Margaret's knees gave. Thomas caught her elbow, guided her to a velvet-covered settee. "Morton," she managed. "He said you were his nephew, his foreman." "I am his foreman at the town mill, but I own this, all of this, have for 5 years. The envelope in his coat pocket pressed against her ribs as she breathed. "Bank papers. San Francisco bank papers. How much money did it take to build something like this? You lied." "Yes." The simple admission should have made her angry. Instead, she felt hollow, like someone had scooped out her insides and left only shell. "Why?" The word came out broken. Thomas moved to the fireplace, gripped the carved mantel. "Because I wanted to know if someone could choose me without the money, just me." "So you chose me, bought me with my father's debt. Your father's debt was real. Morton's offer was real. I just accepted it." Margaret stood, the room tilting. "I need air." Margaret, but she was already moving, through the blue suite, down the stairs, her boots striking the marble like hammers. Behind her, she heard Thomas following, heard Mrs. Rodriguez asking questions, heard the murmur of servants. She burst through the front door, into the garden, gulping mountain air. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and red. Beautiful, perfect, false as Thomas Brennan's poverty. At the garden's edge, she stopped, turned back to look at the house, mansion, whatever it was. Thomas stood on the porch, watching her, hands at his sides. Even from here, she could see the sadness in his stance, the loneliness of a rich man who'd had to pretend poverty to find a wife. Margaret reached into the coat pocket, pulled out the envelope. Bank papers, as she'd suspected. But underneath the account statements, something else. A letter, dated 3 days ago. Thomas's handwriting. "If you're reading this," it began, "then you've discovered the truth sooner than I could tell it." Her hands started shaking. She looked up at Thomas, still watching from the porch. What else had he hidden in this house of lies? Margaret's fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Papa used to order from San Francisco before the debts came. "If you're reading this, then you've discovered the truth sooner than I could tell it. Please understand, Mrs. Brennan." She spun. Mrs. Rodriguez stood 3 feet away, hands folded at her waist. "Mr. Brennan requests you join him in the library. He says there are matters requiring explanation." Margaret crumpled the letter, shoved it back in the coat pocket. "Where is the library?" "I'll show you." Back through the house, their footsteps echoing on marble, then muffled on Turkish runners that lined the halls, paintings on the walls, landscapes, portraits of people Margaret didn't recognize, gas sconces already lit against the approaching dusk, their brass fixtures polished to mirror brightness. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped at tall double doors, dark wood with brass handles shaped like pine cones. She knocked twice, opened without waiting for response. "Mrs. Brennan?" "Sir." The library took Margaret's breath. Books floor to ceiling on 3 walls. Leather spines catching lamplight, a massive desk dominated one corner, papers spread across its surface, maps on the walls between shelves. The 4th wall was windows, showing the valley now purple with shadow. Thomas stood at the desk, his back to her. He'd removed his suit jacket, rolled his shirt sleeves to the elbows. His suspenders made dark lines down his back. "Close the door." "Puma, please, Mrs. Rodriguez." The door clicked shut. They were alone. Thomas turned, a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. Whiskey, from the smell. His other hand gripped the desk edge, knuckles white. "How much do you want to know?" "Everything." He took a swallow of whiskey, set the glass down hard. "My grandfather started with 1 mill in Maine. My father built it to 4. When he died, I was 16. It came to me, along with my mother's railroad money." "Railroad money." "The Brennans of Boston. You might have heard of them." She had. Everyone had. They owned half the track between Boston and Chicago, plus shipping interests, plus Lord knew what else. "You're one of those Brennans." "Was. My parents contested the will, tried to have me declared incompetent to inherit. When that failed, they suggested I might be happier elsewhere." His jaw tightened. "I've been elsewhere since." Margaret moved closer to the desk. The papers spread. There were ledgers, columns of numbers that made her head swim. She picked up one page, a bank statement. The balance at the bottom had too many zeros to be real. 11 million, Thomas said quietly. Total assets, including land, bills, and investments. The paper slipped from her numb fingers, drifted to the floor like a leaf. 11 million, she repeated. Yes, and you were working at Morton's mill, 6 days a week, 12-hour shifts. Yes. Why? The word came out cracked. Thomas moved to the window, pressed his palm against the glass. Because I needed to be someone else, someone who could be chosen for himself, not his accounts. So you lied. Yes. Pretended to be poor. Yes. Let Morton treat you like dirt, order you around, thinking you were his charity case nephew. Yes. And watched me for months. Her voice rose with each word. Studied me like some specimen in a jar. Not like 4 months, 3 weeks. That's what you said. You counted the days. She grabbed another paper from the desk, a contract of some kind. Did you document it all? Keep notes on the school teacher you were planning to acquire? Thomas turned from the window. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. She threw the contract at him. It fluttered uselessly to the floor. Tell me about watching someone who didn't know you existed. You taught the Henderson children every Tuesday and Thursday. After school, behind the church, you used your lunch money to buy them slates. His voice went soft, distant. You gave Mrs. Patterson half your bread every Saturday at market. You sang hymn 7 from memory while everyone else read from the hymnal. Margaret's throat closed. You were watching all that time? I sat in the back pew, Sundays, Wednesday prayer meetings when I could. He moved toward her, stopped when she stepped back. You wore your mother's blue dress on Easter. You had it altered after she passed, but the hem still showed the original stitching. Stop. You read to your father every evening. Dickens, mostly. Sometimes Psalms. When he was feeling poorly. Stop. You cried alone in the garden after you sold your mother's pearl necklace. 3 weeks ago, Tuesday, just after sunset, Margaret's hand cracked across his face. The sound echoed in the library like a gunshot. Thomas didn't move, didn't touch his reddening cheek, just stood there, looking at her with those coffee-colored eyes that held too much. I had no right, he said quietly. I know that. No right. Margaret's voice shook. You had no right to my private grief, no right to my struggle, no right to buy me like cattle at auction. The debt was real. Your father owed Morton $800. She laughed, bitter. What's $800 to a man with 11 million? Everything. If it brought me you. The simple honesty of it stopped her cold. Don't. She backed toward the door. Don't you dare make this about love or fate or God's plan. You lied, manipulated, orchestrated everything. Yes. Bought me. Yes. And you'd do it again. Thomas met her eyes straight on. Yes. Margaret turned to flee, but something caught her eye. A painting on the wall between bookshelves. A portrait of a man in military uniform, Union blue, colonel's insignia on the shoulders. Thomas, younger, clean-shaven, but unmistakably Thomas. She moved closer. A brass plate on the frame read, Colonel Thomas James Brennan, Maine Infantry, 18th. You were in the war. 3 years? You were 20 in 18th. 19 fictional family connections got me a commission. Money always does. His voice went flat. I earned the rank later. After Antietam, after Gettysburg. Margaret studied the painted face. Proud, confident, untouched by what was to come. Nothing. Like the man who sat in back pews and carved wooden birds. What happened to him? She touched the brass plate. This man in the uniform, he died. Somewhere between Chancellorsville and Cold Harbor, a different man came home. She turned. Thomas stood behind her, close enough she could see the pulse in his throat, the small scar on his jaw from this morning's shaving. Which man am I married to? I don't know. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. I've been so many people, I don't know which one is real anymore. Margaret wanted to hate him, wanted to rage and storm and break things. Instead, she felt hollow, exhausted, older than her 19 years. I need to be alone. Your rooms, are they really mine, or just another stage you've set? Thomas flinched. Yours, everything here is yours now. Because you bought me. Because you're my wife. Same thing, isn't it? She moved past him toward the door. You paid the debt. You get the goods. Margaret, she stopped at the door, hand on the brass pine cone handle. Tell me something, Thomas. If Morton hadn't made his offer, would you ever have approached me?" Silence stretched between them. Finally, no. "Why not?" "Because you deserve better than a man who counts steps to keep from falling apart, who wakes up screaming from dreams of boys dying in Virginia mud, who has to pretend to be someone else just to leave his house." His voice cracked on the last word. Margaret turned. Thomas stood by his portrait, the painted colonel watching over the broken millionaire. "You're right," she said quietly. "I did deserve better." She left him there, standing beneath the ghost of who he used to be. Mrs. Rodriguez waited in the hall, patient as stone. "Your rooms, Mrs. Brennan," Margaret nodded, followed the housekeeper up the stairs. At the blue suite, Mrs. Rodriguez opened the doors, gestured inside. "Dinner is at 7, or I can have a tray sent up." "A tray, please." "Yes, ma'am." "And Mrs. Brennan." The older woman hesitated. "Mr. Brennan had these rooms prepared 6 weeks ago, every detail chosen specific. He wanted them perfect for you." 6 weeks ago, before Morton's offer, before the arrangement. Margaret entered the suite, closed the door, had moved through the sitting room to the bedroom. The four-poster bed had blue damask curtains. The wardrobe stood open, showing dresses she'd never seen. 6 of them, all her size, all finer than anything she'd owned. On the dresser sat a wooden box, polished walnut with silver hinges. Inside, nestled in velvet, lay 3 carved birds, not just one like he'd given her, but 3, each different, each perfect, each signed with those tiny initials. Under them, a note, one for hope, one for sorrow, one for truth, when you're ready to hear it. Margaret picked up the first bird wings, spread wide in flight. The second head tucked as if in grief. The third bird was actually 2 birds, carved from the same piece of wood, intertwined in flight, inseparable. She set it down, hands shaking, moved to the window. Below, she could see Thomas walking toward the stables, shoulders bent like a man carrying stones. He stopped at the paddock fence, leaned against it. Even from here, she could see his exhaustion. A man appeared from the stables. Peterson, the guard from the gate. They talked briefly. Peterson handed Thomas something. Papers. Thomas read, crumpled them, threw them in the dirt. Then he saw her watching. Raised his hand as if to wave, thought better of it, let it fall. Margaret stepped back from the window. On the dresser, the 3 birds waited, past, present, future. Hope, sorrow, truth. She picked up the note again. Something was written on the back, so faint she almost missed it. "The 4th bird is still being carved." Margaret set down the note, looked back at the window. Thomas was gone, but the crumpled papers still lay in the dirt by the paddock vase fence. What had Peterson brought him? What had made him react that way? And what was the 4th bird meant to be? Margaret woke to silence. No rooster crow like at home, no papa coughing in the next room, just the tick of a mantel clock and her own breathing in the too large bed. Gray light leaked through the curtains. Dawn, maybe an hour past. She'd slept in her chemise, too tired last night to explore the wardrobe of fine dresses that weren't hers, would never be hers no matter what papers she'd signed. Her stomach cramped with hunger. The dinner tray had sat untouched on the side table until Mrs. Rodriguez retrieved it near midnight, clicking her tongue, but saying nothing. Margaret found a wrapper among the mysterious clothes, blue wool, soft as butter, nothing like the rough cotton she'd worn at home. It fit perfect, of course. Everything in this room fit perfect. Thomas had seen to that. The house lay quiet as she descended the stairs. Her bare feet made no sound on the carpet runner. Somewhere a clock chimed 7 times. At home, she'd have been up 2 hours already, starting the fire, making Papa's oatmeal, heating water for his chest compress. Papa? Was he eating? Mrs. Morrison had promised to check on him, but promises didn't fill bellies or change bed linens. The breakfast room faced east, catching morning sun through tall windows. A single place was set china so fine she could see light through it, silver heavy enough to be melted down for mortgage payments. On the sideboard, covered dishes, steam curling from under the edges. "Mrs. Brennan," Mrs. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway. "I wasn't sure when you'd rise. Shall I prepare fresh eggs?" "These are fine." Margaret lifted a cover. Eggs, bacon, biscuits, enough for 3 people. Her stomach turned. "Is Mr. Brennan not eating?" "He left at 5 for the mills. He takes coffee only." Standing at the kitchen stove. 5 o'clock, good. 2 hours before dawn. Margaret put 1 egg on her plate, half a biscuit, sat at the enormous table built for 12. The chair felt like a throne, high-backed and carved. She ate mechanically, each bite like sawdust. "Would you care to see the house?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked when Margaret pushed away the barely touched plate. "Mr. Brennan thought you might like to know your new home." "Your new home." The words sat heavy as the silver fork. They toured for an hour. Parlors, sitting rooms, a music room with a piano that made her sold one look like a toy. The kitchen with its massive iron stove and copper pots hanging like armor, a greenhouse full of plants she couldn't name. 32 rooms in all, not counting the servants' quarters on the 3rd floor. "How many staff?" Margaret asked. 12 in the house. More for the grounds and stables, all for one man who ate standing at the stove. "How long has Mr. Brennan lived here alone?" 5 years, ma'am, since the house was finished. 5 years of empty rooms, silent dinners, no one to notice if he came home or not. Margaret spent the afternoon in the garden, walking paths lined with stones painted white. Someone had planted roses along the south wall, climbers that would bloom come summer. Vegetable plots lay beyond, tended but not loved, everything in rigid rows. At the garden's edge, she found a bench facing west toward the mills. Smoke rose from the chimneys, the distant shriek of saws carrying on the wind. Was Thomas there, playing foreman for Morton? Or was he here somewhere, managing his empire while pretending poverty and town dinner came and went? Another tray in her room? Another night of picking at food while her stomach knotted? She could hear life in the house, footsteps, voices, pots clanging in the kitchen, but it all felt distant, like listening through deep water. She tried to read. The books in her sitting room were new, spines uncracked, Dickens, Austen, Bronte. Had Thomas chosen them or told someone, "Buy what women like," and left it at that? Sleep wouldn't come. The bed was too soft, the sheets too smooth, the silence too complete. At home, Papa's breathing through the thin wall had been her nighttime clock. Here, she had only the mantel clock, marking hours that felt like days. Near midnight, she gave up, pulled on the wrapper, crept downstairs. Maybe warm milk would help, the way Mother used to make it, with a touch of honey and nutmeg. The kitchen was dark, except for banked coals in the stove. She fumbled for matches, lit a lamp. The copper pots caught the light, glowing like sunset. She found milk in the icebox. Imagine that, and a pot small enough to manage. The milk was just starting to steam when footsteps sounded in the hall. She turned, expecting Mrs. Rodriguez. Thomas stood in the doorway. Wood shavings clung to his hair. Sawdust streaked his shirt. A cut on his left hand bled sluggish, dropping spots on the floor. "You're hurt." He looked down at his hand, like he'd forgotten it was there. "Saw slipped. Nothing serious. It needs cleaning." "It's fine." But he swayed slightly, caught himself on the doorframe. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. When had he last slept? Really slept, not just dozed in a chair. "Sit," Margaret pointed to the kitchen stool. "Before you fall." He sat up close. She could smell the mill on him pine pitch, machine oil, sweat from honest work. Not the cologne and cigars of wealthy men, but the scent of someone who'd spent 12 hours cutting wood. Margaret found clean cloth in a drawer. Carbolic acid in the medicine cabinet Mrs. Rodriguez had shown her. Thomas's hand lay heavy in hers as she cleaned the cut. Not deep, but ragged. It would scar. "Why do you do it?" she asked, wrapping the bandage. "Work at Morton's mill when you have all this?" "Because Thomas the foreman is who I am 6 days a week. The man who owns this." He gestured at the kitchen with his good hand. "He only exists here." "That doesn't make sense, doesn't it?" He pulled his hand back, flexed the fingers. "In town, I know who I am. The quiet one who keeps his head down, does his work, goes home. Here, I'm nothing, rooms full of nothing." The milk hissed on the stove. Margaret rescued it, poured 2 cups without asking if he wanted any. "Found honey in the pantry, nutmeg in a spice box that held dozens of jars she couldn't identify." They drank in silence. Thomas hunched on the stool like he might bolt any moment. Margaret stood by the stove, feeling the heat through her wrapper. "Your father," Thomas said suddenly. "I sent Dr. Mills to check on him, paid for medicines, told Mills to say they were samples. You—" Margaret set down her cup hard. Milk sloshed. "You had no right. He's dying." The words hit like cold water. The consumption's advanced. Mills gives him maybe a month, maybe less. Margaret's knees went weak. She grabbed the stove edge, hissing as her palm touched the hot metal. Thomas was there instantly, pulling her to the water pump, holding her burned hand under the cold stream. His arms made a cage around her, not touching except where he held her wrist, but close enough she could feel his heat through the wrapper. "How long have you known?" Her voice came out strangled. "Since I first saw him 3 months ago. The weight loss, the cough, the blood on his handkerchiefs." 3 months, while she'd been scraping pennies for medicine. That wouldn't help. Thomas had known. "Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed Thomas, the poor lumberjack?" She pulled away, cradled her burned hand against her chest. "So you let me marry you thinking I was saving him. The debt was real. Morton's threat was real. But you could have stopped at any time." "Yes. Could have paid the debt. Saved Papa. Never spoken to me at all." "Yes. But you wanted me." Not a question. Thomas moved back to the stool, shoulders bent. "I wanted to matter to someone before I—" He stopped. "Before you, what?" He looked up then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her throat close. Not sadness, not loneliness, something worse. "Before I become like this house, 22 rooms with no one in them." He stood, headed for the door. "Good night, Margaret." "Thomas." He stopped but didn't turn. "The papers Peterson brought you at the paddock." His shoulders tightened. "How did you—" "I saw from the window." "What were they?" Silence stretched between them. Finally, a letter from Boston. "Your parents, they're lawyers." He turned then, and his face was stone. "Seems they've heard about my marriage. They're coming to visit, to meet the woman who married their son for his money." Margaret's burned hand throbbed in time with her heartbeat. "When?" 2 weeks. "What will you tell them?" Thomas laughed, short and bitter. "The truth, that they're right. I bought you, just like they said I'd have to buy anyone who'd have me." He left before she could respond. His footsteps echoed through the empty house, up the stairs, Down some hall she hadn't explored, a door closed, firm and final. Margaret stood alone in the kitchen, her hand burning, milk cooling on the stove. 2 weeks before Thomas's parents arrived to confirm what everyone already knew. She was a bought bride, purchased to fill empty rooms. She picked up the cup Thomas had drunk from. His blood had left a smear on the handle. When she raised it to the light, the stain looked like the outline of a bird. The telegram boy's boots thundered on the porch. Margaret dropped her teacup. China shattered on a marble, brown liquid spreading like blood. Mrs. Rodriguez answered the door, voices urgent. Then the housekeeper's quick steps. "Mrs. Brennan." She held out the yellow paper. "From town." Margaret's fingers wouldn't work right. The telegram crinkled, tore at one corner. Finally, the words came clear. "Father, critical stop come at once. Stop Mills." The paper floated from her numb hands. Mrs. Rodriguez caught it, read quickly. "I'll fetch Mr. Brennan." "No." Margaret's voice came out strange. "Where is he?" "The lower mill." "But, ma'am," Margaret was already moving. Out the door, down the garden path, her house slippers soaking through in the morning dew. The mill buildings loomed ahead, the shriek of saws growing louder. Men looked up from their work, startled. A woman in her wrapper, hair unpinned, running like the devil was after her. She found Thomas in the sorting shed, checking lumber grades. He looked up, saw her face, dropped the board he was holding. "What's happened?" She held out the telegram. He read it, already moving. "Peterson." The guard appeared from nowhere. "Best team, fastest wagon, medical supplies from the doctor's stores. 5 minutes." "Sir." Thomas gripped Margaret's shoulders. Sawdust fell from his sleeves onto her wrapper. "Get dressed. Warm clothes. We'll be driving through the night." She ran back to the house. Mrs. Rodriguez had clothes laid out, the yellow cotton dress, sturdy boots, her winter cloak. Margaret dressed with shaking hands, fingers fumbling buttons. When she came down, Thomas had changed too. Clean clothes, but practical. The wagon waited outside. A different one-lighter, built for speed. The horses stamped, sensing urgency. Thomas lifted her up, climbed beside her. "Hold tight!" He drove like Judgment Day was coming. The wagon lifted off its wheels at the bumps, landed hard. Margaret gripped the seat, teeth rattling. Trees blurred past. At the gates, Peterson had them open, waved them through without stopping. 8 hours to town on a good day. Thomas aimed to make it in 6. They had stopped only to change horses at a way station. Thomas seemed to know. Fresh team, barely a minute lost. The sun crossed overhead, started its descent. Still they flew. Margaret's bones ached from the jarring. Her hands had gone numb from gripping, but Thomas never slowed, never hesitated, taking curves that made her stomach drop. "The medicine?" she said, over the wind. "What did you bring?" "Everything. Laudanum, morphine, carbolic, whatever Mills might need." "You can't. Morphine's expensive." "Stop." His voice cut to sharp. "Your father's dying. Nothing else matters." They hit the main road as sunset painted everything orange. The town appeared, windows glowing with lamplight. Thomas drove straight to the Whitfield house, pulled up so hard the horses reared. Dr. Mills met them at the door. His face told everything. "How long?" Thomas asked. "Hours, maybe less." "He's been asking for her." Margaret pushed past them both, took the stairs running. The smell hit her first blood, medicine, the sweet rot scent she remembered from Mother's last days. Papa lay propped on pillows, so thin the bed sheets barely rose over him. His eyes were closed, breath coming in rattles with long gaps between. "Papa." His eyes opened, took a moment to focus. "Margaret, my little bird." She knelt beside the bed, took his hand, bird bones in tissue paper skin. So cold. "I'm here." "Good," he coughed, pink foam on his lips. She wiped it away with her handkerchief. "The boy—" "Thomas is here." "Good boy. New?" Knew he'd bring you quick." She heard Thomas enter, felt him standing behind her. Papa's eyes tracked to him. "You knew," Papa said, not a question. "I knew," Thomas replied quietly. "All of it. The money, the mills." Margaret's breath stopped. "Papa, Morton talks. When he drinks, heard things about his nephew, who wasn't his nephew." Another cough, weaker. "Richest man in 3 states, pretending to be poor. You knew." Margaret turned to stare at her father. "You knew, and you let you marry a man who'd burn the world down to keep you safe." Papa's grip tightened on her hand. "Saw him watching you for months, like a man dying of thirst. Watches water." Thomas made a sound behind her. When she looked, his face had gone pale. "That kind of want," Papa continued, "can go bad. Or good, depends on the man." His eyes found Thomas again. "You're a good man, under all that money, all that loneliness. Good man. Mr. Whitfield, take care of her." "I will." "Promise, on your honor." "What's left from the war?" Thomas's voice came out rough. "On my honor. What's left of it?" Papa smiled. Blood lined his teeth. "Knew you were a soldier, way you stand, way you watch exits." A pause for breath that didn't want to come. "What rank?" "Colonel, 14th Maine." "Good regiment? Saw hard fighting?" "Yes, sir." "How many men did you lose?" Margaret felt Thomas go rigid behind her. "Too many." "Always too many." Papa's eyes closed. "Don't lose her." "No." "Sir." The breathing changed, shallower, longer gaps. DeMills moved closer, fingers on Papa's wrist. "Margaret," Papa's voice barely a whisper, "I'm here. Your mother would be proud. The choice you made, Papa, strong choice, like hers, when she married me, teacher with consumption in his blood, no money, no prospects." A ghost of a smile. "But she saw something, like you did." Margaret looked back at Thomas. He stood with his hat in his hands, head bowed like he was praying. Maybe he was. "Love him," Papa whispered. "He needs it. More than money, more than air." "Papa, I promise." How could she promise that? How could she love a man built of lies? "I'll try." "Good enough." Papa's hand went slack in hers. "Tell your mother I'm coming." One more breath, another, then nothing. Dr. Mills bent over him, listened with his stethoscope, straightened slowly, shook his head. "I'm sorry. He's gone." Margaret sat holding her father's cooling hand. Someone was crying. After a moment, she realized it was her. Arms came around her. Thomas, lifting her gentle, carrying her to the chair. She fought him, weakly. "No, I need to. Mrs. Morrison's here. She'll take care of things. But Papa is past hurting." Thomas knelt in front of her, eye level. His hands covered hers, warm and solid. "Let others help now. I don't know how. I know." His thumb brushed her cheek, came away wet. "But learn, please." Mrs. Morrison appeared with other church ladies. They moved around the room, quiet and efficient, doing what needed doing. Thomas never moved from his knees in front of Margaret, holding her hands while strangers tended her father's body. "The funeral," she said finally. "Tomorrow. I've arranged everything." "How?" "Started arrangements when we left this morning." He stood, knees popping. "Reverend Williams, the cemetery plot, the coffin, pine like your mother's. They'll rest side by side." She should be angry that he'd planned her father's funeral while the man still breathed. Instead, she felt grateful. Her mind couldn't form thoughts past the image of Papa's still face. "I need to pray." "Yes." Thomas helped her stand. But when she knelt beside the bed where Papa lay, Thomas knelt too. His hand found hers, Together they prayed the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalm, the words Mother had taught her before she could properly read. When they finished, Margaret looked at Thomas. Tears had cut tracks through the sawdust on his face. "You loved him too. He was the first person in 5 years to see me. Not my money, not my name. Me?" Thomas's voice broke. "He knew everything and still trusted me with you." And Margaret studied this man, her husband, kneeling beside her dead father. $11 million, but crying over a poor teacher's trust. "Thomas." "Yes." "Papa said you'd burn the world down to keep me safe." "Yes." "Would you—" He met her eyes straight on, already started. "What do you mean?" Thomas pulled a paper from his pocket. Another telegram, this one addressed to him. "From Boston. My parents aren't coming in 2 weeks." He handed it to her. "They're here. Arrived this afternoon. They're waiting at the house." Margaret read the telegram twice. Mr. and Mrs. James Brennan of Boston had come to meet their son's bride. The bought bride. The debt payment. The woman who'd married their son for his money. Thomas. "They want to buy you off, make you disappear." His jaw tightened. "They don't know I'd disappear with you." As Margaret looked at her father's still form, then at Thomas. "Then we'd better go meet them." The house blazed with light, every window, every lamp, like someone had set fire to the darkness. Margaret's mourning dress, hastily borrowed from Mrs. Morrison, scratched against her neck. The wool smelled of camphor and other people's grief. Thomas stopped the wagon at the front steps. His shoulders pulled tight under his jacket, the muscles cording in his neck. "You don't have to do this," he said. "Not tonight, not after—" "They came to inspect your purchase." Margaret's voice came out flat. "Let them inspect." Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the door, her usual composure cracked. "Mr. Brennan, they're in the main parlor. They've been examining things." Thomas's jaw tightened. He helped Margaret down, kept her hand on his arm as they walked inside. Voices carried from the parlor, a woman's, sharp as winter. "Really, James, look at these accounts. He's spending a fortune on those workers. Medical care, schools, it's socialism. Now, it's Catherine. Don't now, it's Catherine. Me. Our son has lost his mind out here in this wilderness." Thomas stopped at the parlor door, drew a breath that shook slightly. Margaret squeezed his arm. They entered together. The couple by the fireplace turned in unison. James Brennan had Thomas's height, but carried it differently, straight-backed, chin high, every inch declaring his importance. Catherine Brennan stood smaller, bird-thin, but her eyes could have cut glass. She wore black silk that probably cost more than Papa's house, diamonds at her throat that caught the light like trapped stars. "Thomas?" His mother's gaze scraped over him, taking in the sawdust in his hair, the work clothes under his good jacket. "You look rustic." "Mother?" "Father." Thomas's voice could have frozen hell. "This is my wife, Margaret." Catherine's attention shifted. Margaret felt those eyes cataloging everything: the borrowed mourning dress, the country accent she couldn't quite hide, the calluses on her hands from years of housework. Indeed, the single word dripped contempt. "How much?" "I beg your pardon," Margaret said. "How much to leave?" "We've brought bank drafts. 20,000 should be sufficient for someone of your background." Thomas stepped forward. "Mother, don't interrupt, Thomas. This is business." Catherine pulled papers from her bag. 25,000 then, more than you'd see in a lifetime, I'm sure." Margaret let go of Thomas's arm, walked to Catherine Brennan, took the papers. 30,000, she said. Catherine's eyebrows rose. "Greedy little thing, aren't you practical?" Margaret studied the bank drafts. "But you're right. This is more than I'd see in a lifetime. More than my father saw. He died 3 hours ago. By the way, in case you wondered why I'm wearing mourning dress, I'm sorry for your loss, James said quietly. No, you're not. Margaret handed the papers back. You're sorry your son married beneath his station. Sorry he chose a nobody from nowhere. Sorry you have to soil your shoes coming here to fix his mistake. How dare... But here's what you don't understand. Margaret moved closer to Catherine, close enough to smell her French perfume, see the powder caking in the lines around her mouth. I didn't marry your son for his money. I married him to pay a debt, my father's debt. $800. $800. Catherine laughed, sharp as breaking glass. Thomas, you bought a wife for $800. The debt was real, Thomas said. The choice was real. The choice? His mother whirled on him. What choice does a pauper's daughter have when offered marriage to millions? The choice to say no, Margaret said, which I'm doing now. To you? Keep your 30,000, keep your contempt, keep your son if you can. She started for the door. Thomas caught her arm. Margaret, no. She pulled free. I won't be inspected like livestock. Won't be bought off like an inconvenience. My father is being laid out in his coffin right now, and I'm standing here letting strangers calculate my price. You are the price, Catherine said. The price of my son's foolishness? How much will it cost to make you disappear? Margaret turned back. Nothing. I'll disappear for free tomorrow after I bury my father. Margaret, no. Thomas moved between her and his parents. You're my wife, bought and paid for. Your mother's right. That's not, isn't it? She gestured at the room, the house, everything. You paid my father's debt, saved me from other arrangements, gave me no choice but gratitude. I gave you a choice, the annulment papers. What papers? Catherine's voice went sharp. Thomas pulled the documents from his jacket. Annulment papers, prepared the day after our wedding. She can leave any time. No penalties, plus $10,000 settlement. His mother satched the papers, read quickly. You gave her an escape clause. I gave her freedom. Then why hasn't she taken it? Catherine looked between them. If not for money, why stay? Margaret felt the answer rising in her throat. Dangerous truth. She swallowed it down. Because I'm a fool, she said instead. Walked out, behind her. Voices rose. Thomas and his mother, sharp words she couldn't make out. She climbed the stairs to the blue suite, closed the door, leaned against it. Her father was dead. Thomas's parents wanted her gone. The annulment papers were real, waiting. $10,000 and freedom. Why hadn't she taken it? A knock, soft. Margaret, Thomas. Through the door, may I come in? She opened it. He stood there looking destroyed, jacket gone, shirt untucked, hair standing where he'd run his hands through it. They're leaving. Took rooms in town. They'll be gone after... He stopped. I'm sorry. About what they said, what they offered. 30,000 is a lot of money. You could have taken it. Yes. Why didn't you? Margaret moved to the window. The garden spread below, lit by moon now that the house lights had dimmed. My father said you were a good man, under the money and loneliness. Your father was kind. No, Papa was honest. Brutally honest. When needed, she turned to face him. Tell me something true. Thomas, something that has nothing to do with money or arrangements or debt. He stood in the doorway like he might run. Then, I dream about you, have since February, that town meeting where you fought for the library. You wore a green dress, had your hair pinned different, with your mother's tortoiseshell comb. You quoted Jefferson and Franklin and made Mayor Henderson look like a fool. He paused. That night, I went home and drew your face. Couldn't get the eyes right. Drew it 20 times. Still have them all? Thomas, you want truth. I'm terrified. Every morning I wake up sure you'll be gone, that you'll realize what a bad bargain you've made. A man who can't sleep without counting, who has to work himself exhausted to stop the shaking, who sees dead boys when he closes his eyes. How many? What? How many boys died under your command? His face went white. 437, sure. I know all their names. You count it. I count everything. Steps, breaths, days since I met you. His hands fisted at his sides. 143 days, 3,432 hours, everyone wondering how to approach you, how to be worthy of you. So you bought me instead. Yes. The word came out raw, because I'm a coward, because watching you from afar was killing me, and having you hate me up close is still better than not having you at all. Margaret crossed to him, put her hand on his chest, his heart hammered under her palm. I don't hate you. You should? Yes. She moved closer. But Papa was right. You're a good man under all of it. Margaret, she kissed him, first kiss since their wedding. He tasted of coffee and grief. His hands came up, framed her face like she might break. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. After the funeral, she said, after we bury Papa, then we decide what comes next. Together. Together. He left then, walked to his study, she supposed. Margaret went to the window, watched clouds pass over the moon. Tomorrow they'd put Papa in the ground beside Mother. Tomorrow Thomas's parents would watch, calculating the cost of their son's mistake. Tomorrow she'd have to choose freedom or this man who counted the days since he'd first seen her. She picked up the carved birds from the dresser. Hope, sorrow, truth. 3 birds for 3 stages of whatever this was between them. Her fingers found something else in the box. A 4th bird, rough carved, unfinished. 2 birds again, but different, not flying together. One bird lifting the other, carrying it. She turned it over, on the base, barely scratched. For tomorrow. Margaret set down the carving, looked toward Thomas's study where light still burned. Tomorrow, after they buried Papa, after the grief settled, after his parents left. Tomorrow. She'd tell him about the child growing inside her, the child she'd suspected for a week, but only knew for certain today, when Mrs. Morrison had taken one look at her and known, the way women always know. Tomorrow, everything would change, if they made it through tomorrow. Rain started as they lowered Papa's coffin. Not heavy rain. Oregon never gave you the satisfaction of drama. Just steady drizzle that soaked through wool, that turned the cemetery grass slick under their feet. Margaret stood at the grave's edge, Thomas's hand steady on her elbow. Across from them, his parents huddled under a black umbrella. Catherine Brennan's mouth pulled tight as thread, watching her son stand bareheaded in the rain beside his country wife. Reverend Williams read from Ecclesiastes. The words floated past like smoke. 23 people had come more than Margaret expected. Mrs. Chen with her whole family, the Hendricks children Margaret had taught, even some of Morton's mill workers, losing wages to pay respects. Morton himself stood back, hat in hand. He'd tried to approach before the service, mumbling about the debt being settled, no hard feelings. Thomas had stepped between them, said something low that made Morton pale and back away. The first shovel of dirt hit wood. The sound echoed in Margaret's chest, final as a door closing, her knees locked to keep from folding. Steady, Thomas murmured, his grip tightening just enough. More dirt. Papa disappearing, handful by handful. The headstone wouldn't come for weeks, but Thomas had paid for marble to match Mother's. They'd rest side by side, the teacher and his wife, together in death as in life. The crowd thinned. Mourners headed back to their wagons, back to their lives. Catherine Brennan approached, her husband trailing behind. "We're leaving for Boston on the afternoon stage," she announced. "This foolishness has gone far enough." "Safe travels," Thomas said flat. His mother's eyes narrowed. "You're not coming?" "No." "You'd choose her over your family, over your heritage." Thomas looked at his parents, really looked, like he was memorizing them. "You chose money over me when I was 16, tried to steal what grandfather left me. When that failed, you suggested I'd be happier elsewhere." His voice stayed level, no heat, just fact. "I've been elsewhere ever since." "Thomas," his father started. "Goodbye, Father." James Brennan's shoulders sagged. He touched his wife's arm. "Come, Catherine." "This isn't over," she hissed at Margaret. "That annulment offer stands. The money's there when you come to your senses." They left, Catherine's heels clicking sharp on the cemetery path. Thomas watched them go, something dying in his eyes. "I'm sorry," Margaret said. "Don't be. They made their choice years ago." He turned back to Papa's grave. "We should go. Mrs. Morrison's expecting us at the house." The Whitfield house felt smaller, darker, already belonging to strangers. Church ladies had laid out food, cold ham, pickled beets, cornbread. Margaret couldn't eat. Her stomach rolled with more than grief. Thomas stood by the window, watching the rain. He'd been quiet since his parents left. That 1,000-yard stare she recognized from when he talked about the war. "Thomas?" He turned. "We need to go home." "You want to leave?" "I want to go home. To our home." Something shifted in his face. Our home. They made their excuses. Mrs. Morrison pressed Margaret's hand, whispered, "You take care now, both of you." Her knowing look made Margaret's cheeks burn. The ride back was quiet. The rain stopped as they climbed into the mountains. Sun broke through, making everything shine wet and clean. The gate stood open, Peterson waiting, touching his cap as they passed. At the house, Mrs. Rodriguez met them. "I've had hot baths drawn. Supper's at 7 if you're wanting it." Margaret climbed the stairs, legs heavy as stone. In her room, their room, she peeled off the borrowed morning dress. The hot water burned away the cemetery chill, the smell of dirt and death. When she came down, Thomas sat in his study and staring at nothing. The annulment papers lay on his desk. "You kept them." "You should have the choice, always." Margaret picked up the papers. $10,000 and freedom. She could go anywhere, be anyone, start fresh where no one knew about debts and derangements. She tore them in half, then quarters, then eighths. Let the pieces fall like snow on his desk. "Margaret, no more papers, no more contracts." She moved around the desk, stood before him. "Choose me, not because of debt, not because of arrangement. Choose me, Thomas, and I'll choose you." He stood slowly. "You choose this, a broken man who counts everything, who wakes up screaming, who had to lie just to meet you. I choose the man who carved birds for a stranger, who tends sick children at midnight, who drove 6 hours through hell to get me to Papa." She took his hand, placed it on her stomach. "I choose the father of this child." Thomas went rigid. His hand spread across her belly, trembling. "How long?" 6 weeks? Maybe 7. Mrs. Morrison knew just by looking. "A child." His voice cracked. "Our child. If you want." He dropped to his knees, pressed his forehead to her stomach. "Want Margaret? His shoulders shook. "I never thought I'd have this, any of this. A wife, a child, a reason to fill these empty rooms." She ran her fingers through his hair. "We'll fill them together." He stood, kissed her, different from last night. Deeper, surer, like a man who'd finally stopped counting the steps to happiness and decided to arrive. When they broke apart, both were crying. "We need to plant a tree," Margaret said. "What? Papa always said big decisions needed marking. When he and Mother married, they planted the dogwood when I was born, the apple tree out back." She wiped her cheeks. "We should plant something. For choosing each other, for the baby, for whatever comes next." Thomas took her hand. "I know just the place." He led her outside, past the formal gardens, to a clearing she hadn't seen before. A small grove of young trees stood in neat rows. "I planted one for each month since I first saw you," he admitted. "Couldn't help myself." Margaret counted. 6 trees. Half a year of loneliness. Hoping, watching from afar. "We'll add another," Thomas said. "For today. For choosing." They found a sapling in the greenhouse, an oak, small but strong. Thomas dug while Margaret held it steady. The earth smelled rich, full of promise. When the hole was deep enough, they lowered the tree together, packed soil around its roots. "What do we call it?" Margaret asked. "Truth." Thomas wiped dirt on his pants. "For finally telling each other the truth." They stood there, muddy and bared, looking at their small oak among the others. The sun was setting, painting everything gold. "I want to show you something," Thomas said. He led her to his workshop, a building she'd never entered. Inside, wood shavings covered everything. The air smelled of cedar and pine. Shelves lined the walls, and on every shelf, birds. Hundreds of carved birds, all sizes, all poses, all perfect in their detail. Thomas. I started the day after that town meeting. Couldn't stop. Every time I thought of you, I carved. He picked up one from the workbench, still rough. This was going to be for tonight. For, after we decided, it showed 2 birds building a nest together, tiny twigs in their beaks. It's perfect. It's not finished. Neither are we. Margaret took the carving, ran her finger along the rough edges. We'll never be finished. Just building. Thomas pulled her close. She fit against him like she was carved for the space, her head under his chin, his arms circling her and the child growing inside. "I love you," he said into her hair. "Not the idea of you, not the dream. You, Margaret, stubborn and brave and too good for me. I love you too, the real you, the one who counts and carves and carries too much." She pulled back, looked up at him. "The one who'll teach our children to whittle, who'll drive them wild counting their toys, who'll love them fierce as mountain fire. Children plural. This house has 32 rooms. Thomas, we'd better fill some." He laughed, real and deep. "Yes, ma'am." They walked back to the house together. Mrs. Rodriguez had lit the lamps. The windows glowed warm against the darkening sky. It looked like home. Finally, truly home, at dinner. They sat side by side instead of at opposite ends of the table. Thomas's hand found hers between courses. Fingers was intertwined. They talked about the baby, the workers' families, the new school Thomas wanted to build. "We should tell them," Margaret said, "about us, the truth. Everyone knows I'm rich. The workers, the town. Not that truth, the other one, that we chose each other, that this is real now, not arrangement." Thomas squeezed her hand. "Tomorrow. We'll tell them tomorrow." That night, Margaret moved her things to Thomas's room, their room now. He was already there, carving by lamplight. Another bird, this one plump and nesting. "For the baby," he explained, shy as a boy. She took the knife from his hands, set it aside. "Tomorrow. Tonight. Just be here, with me." They lay together in the dark, her back to his chest, his hand spread protective over where their child grew. Outside, wind moved through the trees they'd planted, the oak and its companions, reaching for sky. "Tell me their names," Margaret said quietly. "Whose names?" "The boys, the 437. You said you knew them all." Thomas's breath hitched. Then, slowly, he began. Samuel Abbott, 19, from Bangor. William Ames, 22, liked to fish. Jonathan Andrews, 17, lied about his age. Name after name whispered into darkness. Margaret listened, held his hand as he counted out his grief. When he finished, hours later, his voice was raw. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For letting me remember them. For not trying to fix it or forget it. They're part of you. The counting, the carving, all of it." She turned in his arms, faced him in the gray pre-dawn light. "I choose all of you, even the broken parts. Especially those." He kissed her forehead, gentle. "Sleep. Tomorrow's a big day." "What's tomorrow?" "The day we start over. Properly this time. Mr. and Mrs. Brennan. Whoever they turn out to be." Margaret smiled against his chest. Outside, birds began their morning songs. In her belly, their child grew steady as breathing. Beside her, Thomas's hand relaxed from its counting. Finally still, tomorrow they'd face the world as themselves. No lies, no arrangements, just two people who'd chosen each other despite everything. But tonight, they slept sound in their house of empty rooms that wouldn't be empty long. The carved birds watched from their shelves, witnesses to a love that started with debt and ended with the choice. Outside, the young oak settled its roots deeper, reaching for water, reaching for light, reaching for years and years of growing strong, connecting hearts. Dear friend, I must tell you something. When Thomas carved those birds, one for each week, he watched Margaret. I understood him completely. We've all been that lonely soul, counting days of wanting what seems impossible. I've stood at my own window watching life pass by, too frightened to step outside and claim it. Margaret's father saw the truth that kind of desperate need for connection can destroy or heal, depending on what we do with it. Thomas chose to build something beautiful from his loneliness, a school, a clinic, a family. That's what I wanted you to know, that even our deepest wounds can become doorways to grace. Even marriages that begin in debt can end in devotion. We just have to choose, every morning, to keep planting trees together. Disclaimer. This story was inspired by frontier tales of the 880s American West, created solely for entertainment purposes. This work does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of deception, manipulation, or arranged marriages. The story acknowledges the historical limitations placed on women during this era while celebrating their strength and agency within those constraints. All characters and events are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. This work is intended for mature audiences seeking thoughtful historical fiction. Of course,